response to Carnacki's usual card of invitation to have dinner and listen to a story, I arrived promptly at 427 Cheney Walk to find the three others who were always invited to these happy little times there before me. 5 minutes later, Carnacki, Arkwright, Jessup, Taylor, and I were all engaged in the pleasant occupation of dining. "You've not been long away this time," I remarked as I finished my soup, forgetting momentarily Carnacki's dislike of being asked even to skirt the borders of his story until such time as he was ready. Then he would not stint words. "That's all," he replied with brevity, and I changed the subject, remarking that I had been buying a new gun, to which piece of news he gave an intelligent nod and a smile which I think showed a genuinely good-humored appreciation of my intentional changing of the conversation. Later, when dinner was finished, Carnacki snugged himself comfortably down in his big chair, along with his pipe, and began his story with very little circumlocution. "As Dodson was remarking just now, I've only been away a short time, and for a very good reason, too. I've only been away a short distance. The exact locality I am afraid I must not tell you, but it is less than 20 miles from here, though except for changing a name, that won't spoil the story. And it is a story, too. One of the most extraordinary things ever I have run against. I received a letter a fortnight ago from a man I must call Anderson, asking for an appointment. I arranged a time, and when he came, I found that he wished me to investigate and see whether I could not clear up a long-standing and too well, authenticated case of what he termed haunting. He gave me very full particulars, and finally, as the case seemed to present something unique, I decided to take it up. 2 days later, I drove to the house late in the afternoon. I found it a very old place, standing quite alone in its own grounds. Anderson had left a letter with the butler, I found, pleading excuses for his absence and leaving the whole house at my disposal for my investigations. The butler evidently knew the object of my visit, and I questioned him pretty thoroughly during dinner, which I had in rather lonely state. He is an old and privileged servant, and had the history of the Grey Room exact in detail. From him I learned more particulars regarding 2 things that Anderson had mentioned in but a casual manner. The first was that the door of the Grey Room would be heard in the dead of night to open and slam heavily, and this even though the butler knew it was locked and the key on the bunch in his pantry. The second was that the bedclothes would always be found torn off the bed and hurled in a heap into a corner. But it was the door slamming that chiefly bothered the old butler. Many and many a time, he told me, had he lain awake and just got shivering with fright, listening. For sometimes the door would be slammed time after time, thud, 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 so that sleep was impossible. From Anderson, I knew already that the room had a history extending back over 150 years. 3 people had been strangled in it, an ancestor of his and his wife and child. This is authentic, as I had taken very great pains to discover, so that you can imagine it was with a feeling I had a striking case to investigate that I went upstairs after dinner to have a look at the Grey Room. Peter, the old butler, was in rather a state about my going, and assured me with much solemnity that in all the 20 years of his service, no one had ever entered that room after nightfall. He begged me, in quite a fatherly way, to wait till the morning, when there would be no danger, and then he could accompany me himself. Of course, I smiled a little at him and told him not to bother. I explained that I should do no more than look round a bit, and perhaps affix a few seals. He need not fear. I was used to that sort of thing. But he shook his head when I said that. "There isn't many ghosts like ours, sir," he assured me with mournful pride. And by Jove, he was right, as you will see. I took a couple of candles, and Peter followed with his bunch of keys. He unlocked the door, but would not come inside with me. He was evidently in a fright. And he renewed his request that I would put off my examination until daylight. Of course, I laughed at him again and told him he could stand sentry at the door and catch anything that came out. "It never comes outside, sir," he said in his funny old solemn manner. Somehow he managed to make me feel as if I were going to have the creeps right away. Anyway, it was one to him, you know. I left him there and examined the room. It is a big apartment and well furnished in the grand style, with a huge 4-poster which stands with its head to the end wall. There were 2 candles on the mantelpiece and 2 on each of the 3 tables that were in the room. I lit the lot, and after that the room felt a little less inhumanly dreary. Though, mind you, it was quite fresh and well kept in every way. After I had taken a good look round, I sealed lengths of baby ribbon across the windows, along the walls, over the pictures, and over the fireplace and the wall closets. All the time as I worked, the butler stood just without the door, and I could not persuade him to enter, though I jested him a little as I stretched the ribbons and went here and there about my work. Every now and again he would say, "You'll excuse me, I'm sure, sir, but I do wish you would come out, sir. I'm fair in a quake for you." I told him he need not wait, but he was loyal enough in his way to what he considered his duty. He said he could not go away and leave me all alone there. He apologized, but made it very clear that I did not realize the danger of the room, and I could see, generally, that he was in a pretty frightened state. All the same, I had to make the room so that I should know if anything material entered it, so I asked him not to bother me unless he really heard or saw something. He was beginning to get on my nerves, and the feel of the room was bad enough without making it any nastier. For a time further I worked, stretching ribbons across the floor and sealing them, so that the merest touch would have broken them were anyone to venture into the room in the dark with the intention of playing the fool. All this had taken me far longer than I had anticipated, and suddenly I heard a clock strike 11. I had taken off my coat soon after commencing work. Now, however, as I had practically made an end of all that I intended to do, I walked across to the settee and picked it up. I was in the act of getting into it when the old butler's voice, he had not said a word for the last hour, came sharp and frightened. "Come out, sir, quick, there's something going to happen." Jove, but I jumped, and then in the same moment, one of the candles on the table to the left went out. Now whether it was the wind or what, I do not know. But just for a moment I was enough startled to make a run for the door, though I am glad to say that I pulled up before I reached it. I simply could not bunk out with the butler standing there, after having, as it were, read him a sort of lesson on being brave, you know. So I just turned right round, picked up the 2 candles off the mantelpiece, and walked across to the table near the bed. Well, I saw nothing. I blew out the candle that was still alight. Then I went to those on the 2 tables and blew them out. Then, Outside of the door, the old man called again. "Oh, sir, do be told. Do be told." "All right, Peter," I said, and by Jove, my voice was not as steady as I should have liked. I made for the door and had a bit of work not to start running. I took some thundering long strides, as you can imagine. Near the door, I had a sudden feeling that there was a cold wind in the room. It was almost as if the window had been suddenly opened a little. I got to the door, and the old butler gave back a step in a sort of instinctive way. "Collar the candles, Peter," I said pretty sharply, and shoved them into his hands. I turned and caught the handle and slammed the door shut with a crash. Somehow, do you know, as I did so, I thought I felt something pull back on it, but it must have been only fancy. I turned the key in the lock, and then again double-locking the door. I felt easier then, and set to and sealed the door. In addition, I put my card over the keyhole and sealed it there, after which I pocketed the key and went downstairs, with Peter, who was nervous and silent, leading the way. Poor old beggar. It had not struck me until that moment that he had been enduring a considerable strain during the last 2 or 3 hours. About midnight, I went to bed. My room lay at the end of the corridor upon which opens the door of the gray room. I counted the doors between it and mine, and found that 5 rooms lay between. And I am sure you can understand that I was not sorry. Then, just as I was beginning to undress, an idea came to me, and I took my candle and sealing wax and sealed the doors of all 5 rooms. If any door slammed in the night, I should know just which one. I returned to my room, locked the door, and went to bed. I was waked suddenly from a deep sleep by a loud crash somewhere out in the passage. I sat up in bed and listened, but heard nothing. Then I lit my candle. I was in the very act of lighting it when there came the bang of a door being violently slammed along the corridor. I jumped out of bed and got my revolver. I unlocked the door and went out into the passage, holding my candle high and keeping the pistol ready. Then a queer thing happened. I could not go a step toward the gray room. You all know I am not really a cowardly chap. I've gone into too many cases connected with ghostly things to be accused of that. But I tell you, I funked it. Simply funked it. Just like any blessed kid. There was something precious unholy in the air that night. I ran back into my bedroom and shut and locked the door. Then I sat on the bed all night and listened to the dismal thudding of a door up the corridor. The sound seemed to echo through all the house. Daylight came at last, and I washed and dressed. The door had not slammed for about an hour, and I was getting back my nerve again. I felt ashamed of myself, though in some ways it was silly, for when you're meddling with that sort of thing, your nerve is bound to go sometimes, and you just have to sit quiet and call yourself a coward until daylight. Sometimes it is more than just cowardice, I fancy. I believe at times it is something warning you and fighting for you. But all the same, I always feel mean and miserable after a time like that. When the day came properly, I opened my door, and keeping my revolver handy, went quietly along the passage. I had to pass the head of the stairs along the way, and who should I see coming up but the old butler, carrying a cup of coffee. He had merely tucked his nightshirt into his trousers, and he had an old pair of carpet slippers on. "Hello, Peter," I said, feeling suddenly cheerful, for I was as glad as any lost child to have a live human being close to me. Where are you off to with the refreshments? The old man gave a start and slopped some of the coffee. He stared up at me, and I could see that he looked white and done up. He came on up the stairs and held out the little tray to me. "I'm very thankful indeed, sir, to see you safe and well," he said. "I feared one time you might risk going into the gray room, sir. I've lain awake all night with the sound of the door, and when it came light, I thought I'd make you a cup of coffee. I knew you would want to look at the seals, and somehow it seems safer if there's two, sir." "Peter," I said, "you're a brick. This is very thoughtful of you." And I drank the coffee. "Come along," I told him, and handed him back the tray. "I'm going to have a look at what the brutes have been up to. I simply hadn't the pluck to in the night." "I'm very thankful, sir," he replied. "Flesh and blood can do nothing, sir, against devils, and that's what's in the gray room after dark." I examined the seals on all the doors as I went along and found them right. But when I got to the gray room, the seal was broken, though the card over the keyhole was untouched. I ripped it off and unlocked the door and went in, rather cautiously, as you can imagine. But the whole room was empty of anything to frighten one, and there was heaps of light. I examined all my seals, and not a single one was disturbed. The old butler had followed me in, and suddenly he called out, "The bedclothes, sir." I ran up to the bed and looked over, and surely they were lying in the corner to the left of the bed. Jove, you can imagine how queer I felt. Something had been in the room. I stared for a while from the bed to the clothes on the floor. I had a feeling that I did not want to touch either. Old Peter, though, did not seem to be affected that way. He went over to the bed coverings and was going to pick them up, as doubtless he had done every day these 20 years back. But I stopped him. I wanted nothing touched until I had finished my examination. This I must have spent a full hour over, and then I let Peter straighten up the bed, after which we went out, and I locked the door, for the room was getting on my nerves. I had a short walk and then breakfast, after which I felt more my own man, and so returned to the gray room, and with Peter's help and one of the maids, I had everything taken out of the room except the bed, even the very pictures. I examined the walls, floor, and ceiling then, with probe, hammer, and magnifying glass, but found nothing suspicious. And I can assure you, I began to realize in very truth that some incredible thing had been loose in the room during the past night. I sealed up everything again and went out, locking and sealing the door as before. After dinner, Peter and I unpacked some of my stuff, and I fixed up my camera and flashlight opposite to the door of the gray room, with a string from the trigger of the flashlight to the door. Then, you see, if the door were really opened, the flashlight would blare out, and there would be, possibly, a very queer picture to examine in the morning. The last thing I did before leaving was to uncap the lens, and after that I went off to my bedroom and to bed, for I intended to be up at midnight, and to ensure this, I set my little alarm to call me. Also, I left my candle burning. The clock woke me at 12, and I got up and into my dressing gown and slippers. I shoved my revolver into my right side pocket and opened my door. Then I lit my darkroom lamp and withdrew the slide so that it would give a clear light. I carried it up the corridor about 30 feet and put it down on the floor with the open side away from me so that it would show me anything that might approach along the dark passage. Then I went back and sat in the doorway of my room with my revolver handy, staring up the passage toward the place where I knew my camera stood outside the door of the gray room. I should think I had watched for about an hour and a half when suddenly I heard a faint noise away up the corridor. I was immediately conscious of a queer, prickling sensation about the back of my head, and my hands began to sweat a little. The following instant, the whole end of the passage flicked into sight in the abrupt glare of the flashlight. There came the succeeding darkness, and I peered nervously up the corridor, listening tensely and trying to find what lay beyond the faint glow of my dark lamp, which now seemed ridiculously dim by contrast with the tremendous blaze of the flash power. And then, as I stooped forward, staring and listening, there came the crashing thud of the door of the gray room. The sound seemed to fill the whole of the large corridor and go echoing hollowly through the house. I tell you, I felt horrible, as if my bones were water, simply beastly. Jove, how I did stare, and how I listened. And then it came again. Thud, thud, thud. And then a silence that was almost worse than the noise of the door, for I kept fancying that some awful thing was stealing upon me along the corridor. And then, suddenly, my lamp was put out, and I could not see a yard before me. I realized all at once that I was doing a very silly thing sitting there, and I jumped up. Even as I did so, I thought I heard a sound in the passage, and quite near me. I made one backward spring into my room and slammed and locked the door. I sat on my bed and stared at the door. I had my revolver in my hand, but it seemed an abominably useless thing. I felt that there was something the other side of that door. For some unknown reason, I knew it was pressed up against the door, and it was soft. That was just what I thought. Most extraordinary thing to think. Presently, I got hold of myself a bit and marked out a pentacle hurriedly with chalk on the polished floor. And there I sat in it almost until dawn. And all the time, away up the corridor, the door of the gray room thudded at solemn and horrid intervals. It was a miserable, brutal night. When the day began to break, the thudding of the door came gradually to an end, and at last I got hold of my courage and went along the corridor in the half-light to cap the lens of my camera. I can tell you, it took some doing, but if I had not done so, my photograph would have been spoilt, and I was tremendously keen to save it. I got back to my room, and then set to and rubbed out the 5-pointed star in which I had been sitting. Half an hour later, there was a tap at my door. It was Peter with my coffee. When I had drunk it, we both went along to the gray room. As we went, I had a look at the seals on the other doors, but they were untouched. The seal on the door of the gray room was broken, as also was the string from the trigger of the flashlight. But the card over the keyhole was still there. I ripped it off and opened the door. Nothing unusual was to be seen until we came to the bed. Then I saw that, as on the previous day, the bedclothes had been torn off and hurled into the left-hand corner, exactly where I had seen them before. I felt very queer, but I did not forget to look at all the seals, only to find that not one had been broken. Then I turned and looked at old Peter, and he looked at me, nodding his head. "Let's get out of here," I said. "It's no place for any living human to enter without proper protection." We went out then, and I locked and sealed the door again. After breakfast, I developed the negative, but it showed only the door of the gray room, half opened. Then I left the house, as I wanted to get certain matters and implements that might be necessary to life, perhaps to the spirit, for I intended to spend the coming night in the gray room. I got back in a cab about 5:30 with my apparatus, and this Peter and I carried up to the gray room, where I piled it carefully in the center of the floor. When everything was in the room, including a cat which I had brought, I locked and sealed the door and went toward the bedroom, telling Peter I should not be down for dinner. He said, "Yes, sir," and went downstairs, thinking that I was going to turn in, which was what I wanted him to believe, as I knew he would have worried both me and himself if he had known what I intended. But I merely got my camera and flashlight from my bedroom and hurried back to the gray room. I locked and sealed myself in and set to work, for I had a lot to do before it got dark. First, I cleared away all the ribbons across the floor. Then I carried the cat, still fastened in its basket, over toward the far wall and left it. I returned then to the center of the room and measured out a space 21 feet in diameter, which I swept with a broom of hyssop. About this I drew a circle of chalk, taking care never to step over the circle. Beyond this I smudged, with a bunch of garlic, a broad belt right around the chalked circle. And when this was complete, I took from among my stores in the center a small jar of a certain water. I broke away the parchment and withdrew the stopper. Then, dipping my left forefinger in the little jar, I went round the circle again, making upon the floor, just within the line of chalk, the second sign of the Sama ritual, and joining each sign most carefully with the left-handed crescent. I can tell you, I felt easier when this was done, and the water circle complete. Then I unpacked some more of the stuff that I had brought, and placed a lighted candle in the valley of each crescent. After that, I drew a pentacle, so that each of the 5 points of the defensive star touched the chalk circle. In the 5 points of the star I placed 5 portions of the bread, each wrapped in linen, and in the 5 veils, 5 open jars of the water I had used to make the water circle. And now I had my first protective barrier complete. Now anyone, except you who know something of my methods of investigation, might consider all this a piece of useless and foolish superstition. But you all remember the Black Veil case, in which I believe my life was saved by a very similar form of protection, whilst Astor, who sneered at it and would not come inside, died. I got the idea from the Sigsand MS, written, so far as I can make out, in the 14th century. At first, naturally, I imagined it was just an expression of the superstition of his time, and it was not until a year later that it occurred to me to test his defense, which I did, as I've just said, in that horrible Black Veil business. You know how that turned out. Later, I used it several times, and always I came through safe, until that moving fur case. It was only a partial defense, therefore, and I nearly died in the pentacle. After that, I came across Professor Garder's experiments with a medium. When they surrounded the medium with a current in vacuum, he lost his power, almost as if it cut him off from the immaterial. That made me think a lot, and that is how I came to make the electric pentacle, which is a most marvelous defense against certain manifestations. I use the shape of the defensive star for this protection, because I have, personally, no doubt at all but that there is some extraordinary virtue in the old magic figure. Curious thing for a 20th century man to admit, is it not? But then, as you all know, I never did, and never will, allow myself to be blinded by the little cheap laughter. I ask questions and keep my eyes open. In this last case, I had little doubt that I had run up against a supernatural monster, and I meant to take every possible care, for the danger is abominable. I turn to now to fit the electric pentacle, setting it so that each of its points and veils coincided exactly with the points and veils of the drawn pentagram upon the floor. Then I connected up the battery, and the next instant the pale blue glare from the intertwining vacuum tube shone out. I glanced about me then, with something of a sigh of relief, and realized suddenly that the dusk was upon me, for the window was gray and unfriendly. Then round at the big empty room, over the double barrier of electric and candlelight, I had an abrupt, extraordinary sense of weirdness thrust upon me. In the air, you know, as it were, a sense of something inhuman impending. The room was full of the stench of bruised garlic, a smell I hate. I turned now to the camera and saw that it and the flashlight were in order. Then I tested my revolver carefully, though I had little thought that it would be needed. Yet, to what extent materialization of an abnatural creature is possible, given favorable conditions, no one can say. And I had no idea what horrible thing I was going to see or feel the presence of. I might in the end have to fight with a materialized monster. I did not know, and could only be prepared. You see, I never forgot that 3 other people had been strangled in the bed close to me, and the fierce slamming of the door I had heard myself. I had no doubt that I was investigating a dangerous and ugly case.